Welcome to the Liberty Cast, where we do our best to trigger the American communists with facts and common sense.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to the Liberty Cast. I'm your host, Big E, and we had a pretty busy news week this week. It's always tough to try and decide what I'm going to talk about to narrow it down because so much happens in the intervening week. But today we're going to talk about, obviously, the tragedy in New Zealand, some AOC ridiculousness, some Second Amendment news that I feel like is really important we need to talk about. And then if there's some time, I'll get into the college admission scandal that happened over the past week. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So a couple of days ago over in New Zealand, there was a tragic mass shooting where 49 Muslims were killed in their mosque. Despite the fact that I don't believe that there is such a thing as a moderate Muslim, no one in their right mind condones violence like this. We here at the Liberty Cast condemn his actions in no uncertain terms. It was unacceptable. Now, I have serious issues with Islam and their stated desire to wipe Israel off the map. Obviously, I've said it many times. They want to kill all infidels, establish a worldwide caliphate. But despite all of that, what this murderer did is in no way justifiable. Now, the shooter put out this 74-page manifesto, which I have not completely read at the time that this show airs. I do plan to finish it because I want to know. I'm curious as to what all was going through this person's mind when he did this. I've also watched some of the clips of his live stream, and it's disturbing. It's not for the faint of heart, and I wouldn't recommend seeking it out. But because of my firm stance on the Second Amendment, I don't just want to know about the good things that happen with regard to firearms. I want to make sure that I understand and that I see what's going on in the minds of some of these murderers, these monsters, when they take these tools, these guns that we use for our protection and other lawful purposes, and use them to commit evil, heinous acts. It's not out of some macabre sense of wanting to see something unfold in real life as opposed to a movie script, but I feel like it's important for me and the positions that I hold. Now, as I stated earlier, I have not read the manifesto in its entirety. I have read some of it, and what I'm about to say is going to be unpopular, but some of what he said about immigration and birth rates is not entirely without merit. Now, from what I have read so far, he did not make a distinction between legal and illegal immigration. And I suspect that given his white nationalist leanings, he did not make that distinction. However, I will, because in this country, legal immigration is welcomed, especially if you bring something to the table. And I'm not talking about Tucker Carlson's comments, but immigration should be merit-based. And like I said, legal immigration in this country is welcomed. Illegal immigration, on the other hand, especially these days with what's going on the southern border, as the shooter claims, is in fact an invasion. So for someone to be concerned about excessive illegal immigration into their country, an invasion into their country, is not unreasonable. Now, obviously, the actions that this person took are completely unreasonable and unacceptable. Unfortunately, though, New Zealand has abolished the death penalty. So now the citizens of New Zealand are going to have to pay to feed and house this guy for the rest of his life. Based on his crime, which was in fact an act of domestic terrorism in the state of New Zealand, and the number of murders he committed during this act of terror, and now the death toll is up to 50 from what I understand, that's not a burden that the people of New Zealand should have to bear. I can hear some American communists now Now, Big E, how can you say on one hand that there's no such thing as a moderate Muslim and yet condemn this shooter's actions? Very easily. This person is insane. The people he murdered were not actively involved in any terrorist activity. Now, when push comes to shove, they will side with Muslims if that were to ever happen. If there were ever to be a war, they would side with the Muslims that we call extremists. But what they're really doing is just strictly adhering to the teachings of Muhammad. But until such time they were innocent and posed no threat, those people often called moderate, but in reality they just haven't yet been put in a position to have to choose between Islam or apostatism. But again, let me be clear for the cheap seats. I am not condoning this person's actions. I am not suggesting that what he did was in any way justified or that the people that he murdered deserve to die. That is not what I'm saying. And anyone who suggests that that's what I'm saying, they are intentionally trying to take whatever I've said out of context. It was a sad day. It is a sad time of mourning for the people of New Zealand. I feel for their families. I feel for the country as a whole. And I just wanted to make sure that I address that right off the top. So let's continue the march and talk about something no less distressing. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is the gift that keeps on giving. Listen to her question the CEO of Wells Fargo about things and stuff.
Mr. Sloan, why was the bank involved in the caging of children and financing the caging of children to begin with?
I don't know how to answer that question because we weren't.
So in finance, you were financing and involved in debt financing of CoreCivic and Geo Group, correct?
For a period of time, we were involved in financing one of the firms. We're not anymore, and the other. I'm not familiar with the specific assertion that you're making, but we weren't directly involved in that.
Okay, so these companies run private detention facilities run by ICE, which is involved in caging children. But I'll move on.
What was that? Oh, it just so tedious. Oh, it gets better. Check out this gem.
Should Wells Fargo be held responsible for the damages incurred by climate change due to the financing of fossil fuels and these projects?
I don't know how you'd calculate that, Congresswoman.
Say from spills, or when we have to reinvest in infrastructure, building seawalls from the erosion of infrastructure or cleanups, wildfires, etc.
Related to that pipeline, I'm not aware that there's been any of what you described that's occurred related
How
to that
about
pipeline.
the cleanups from the leaks of the Dakota Access Pipeline?
I'm not aware of the leaks associated with the Dakota Access Pipeline that you're describing.
So hypothetically, if there was a leak from the Dakota Access Pipeline, why shouldn't Wells Fargo pay for the cleanup of it since it paid for the construction of the pipeline itself?
Because we don't operate the pipeline. We provide financing to the company that's operating the pipeline.
She allegedly has a degree in economics from BU. BU should be embarrassed. This is what the people with an econ degree from BU are learning? That program should have its accreditation revoked because, as evidenced by these questions, she has no idea how banks work. Banks don't manage the day-to-day operations of the businesses to which they loan money. Come on. But the mindset reflected here falls in line with the ridiculous ruling in Connecticut that allows the victims of the Sandy Hook shooting, allows their families to sue gun manufacturers. We might get to that later. That may be another show, but that's something we will talk about. But she proved also that she has no idea how tax incentives work. Remember a couple weeks ago when she was praising Amazon pulling out of a deal with New York? I mean, she clearly is woefully out of her depth. Even when she has prepared remarks, she sounds like an idiot. When she has to think on her feet and respond to a question or a rebuttal to a point she attempted to make, she stumbles and stammers and ends up sounding like an even bigger moron. Just like she did in the clip I just played you. Her being on the Financial Services Committee is an embarrassment, or at least it should be. But Crazy Auntie Max is the chair of that committee, so clearly there's no shame in their game. But I'm guessing she was chosen because she has a degree in economics. But listen, she allegedly has a degree in economics, but listen to this.
When I think about what those definitions are, capitalism to me, it's an ideology of capital. It puts capital, the most important thing is the concentration of capital, and it means that we seek and prioritize profit and the accumulation of money above all else, and we seek it at any human and environmental cost. That is what that means. And to me, that ideology is not sustainable and cannot be redeemed.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
Wrong doesn't even begin to describe what that was. On so many levels, just utterly, ridiculously wrong. Now, in the broadest sense, capitalism is freedom. It's an informal system in which private property is owned, and the incentive for capital, quote unquote, investment and the employment of labor is profit. Capitalism is also a philosophy where the government's role in the economy should be limited, and that the forces of supply and demand in a free market, while imperfect, are the most efficient means of providing for the general well-being of society. Capitalism is also the only economic system that has lifted millions of people out of poverty. Socialism, on the other hand, it's also gotten millions of people out of poverty, but it did it by killing them, not by making them more prosperous. Now, I just want to play one more cut for you. I know this is a pretty cut heavy segment, but I just want to play one more cut for you to illustrate just how ridiculous this woman is.
And one perfect example, I think a perfect example of how special interests and the powerful have pitted white working class Americans against brown and black working class Americans in order to just screw over all working class Americans, is Reaganism in the 80s when he started talking about welfare queens. Mm-hmm.
When Reagan talked about welfare queens, it was widely accepted back then that there were more white people on welfare than black people. But Reagan never ascribed any race to it. But as usual, the left were painting Reagan a conservative with the racist brush. And here Cortez is doing the same thing. But not only that, but she was born in 1989. Ronald Reagan's presidency ended in 1988. She had no idea what the Reagan era was like. Now, I lived through it. I'm old enough to remember what it was like when Jimmy Carter was president. I recall how much better economically things got after Reagan took office. The only thing she knows about Reagan is what she's been indoctrinated with at school. And here's the thing, if the working class was so unhappy about being screwed over, as she so eloquently put it, why did he get reelected in 1984 in a landslide? The only state that he didn't win in that election was Walter Mondale's home state of Minnesota, and he only lost that state by less than a percentage point. President Reagan led this country through one of the longest periods of peacetime prosperity this country has ever seen. How did he do that? Free market capitalism. You know what? We're going to take a quick break right here because there's a few other things I want to touch on in this topic before we move on. So let's take a break and we'll see you on the other side. Okay, y'all, I'm going to wrap this topic up real quick. As the clip that I played for you earlier clearly demonstrates, she has no idea what capitalism actually means. And she's a member of the DSA, the Democrat Socialists of America. Bernie Sanders, he introduced us to the term of democratic socialism. But despite her attempts at minimizing the concept of the government takeover of every industry in her Green New Deal, she's clearly a socialist. But have you noticed that no one is talking about Venezuela anymore as a shining example of how well socialism works? The people of Venezuela were promised a bunch of free stuff too. And now they have free sewer water. But they were promised economic justice, and now Venezuela is a devastated shell of its former self. The average Venezuelan has lost nearly 30 pounds. People are eating zoo animals to survive. They're drinking sewer water, like I just mentioned. And those are the results of the policies for which she is advocating. Venezuela should be one of the richest countries in the world. It has the largest oil reserves on the planet. There's no reason why they should be poor. Yet North Dakota, all by itself, the state of North Dakota, produces more oil now than the entire country of Venezuela. So does Texas. So again, she has the donut of a clue of what she's talking about. Have you ever heard this conspiracy theory that there was a casting call she was a part of where she auditioned to become a candidate? I don't put much stock in conspiracy theories. I don't pay much attention to them. But based on what we've seen to date, is it really outside the realm of possibility that that is how she hit the scene and won her seat in Congress? I mean, she knows absolutely nothing, which is kind of par for the course for actors and actresses. And personally, I think there are a lot of actors and actresses that are infinitely smarter than this woman. But you know what? I'm just going to leave that right there. So let's continue the march. And now I want to talk about another socialist. This is a socialist-heavy show today. But Robert Francis O'Rourke has announced his candidacy for president of the United States. Now, I know we say this about politicians in general, but old Robert Francis is a liar. He lied about running for president.
I'm saying that if elected to the Senate, I'll serve every day of that 6-year term, that I'm not looking at 2020. And in fact, I'm completely ruling that out. Not going to do that.
No matter what, win or lose, you're not going to run in
Win or
2020.
lose, I'm not running in 2020.
So right there, win or lose, he ruled out running in 2020, and yet here we are. But did you see the announcement video? I kept hearing about I didn't watch it live. I kept hearing about his hands, and after I saw it, wow. So he said he wasn't going to run, and now he thinks it's a good idea. There's 117 other people running. What's one more, I guess? Now, I don't know what his chances are, because we pretty much already know that the Democrats are going to pick whoever they want to run against Trump. And in fact, I'm predicting right now, it's either going to be Kamala Harris or someone who has yet to enter the race. I don't think Bernie has a shot. I don't think Booker has a shot. Hiawatha has no shot. I'll be surprised if Kirsten Gillibrand makes it to the first debate. And with Robert Francis, I keep hearing people talk about how he's charismatic and they compare him to Obama back in 2008. But I just don't see that. He's less accomplished than Obama was. He lost his bid against Cruz for the United States Senate, and he doesn't seem to stand for anything. He claims to be a capitalist, but he is 100% on board with Everything for which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the rest of the leftists in the Democrat Party are advocating in this Green New Deal. And that's nothing more than a government takeover of every aspect of the private sector under the guise of doing something about climate change. But let's be honest, the party is going to pick who they want. They rigged the system against Bernie to make sure that Hillary got the nomination. So who's to say they won't do it again? Nothing they've done since then says to me that they won't, which most likely means that they will. All right, y'all, there's a couple of things I want to touch on real quick before we get you out of here. The first of which is a ridiculous ruling by the Connecticut Supreme Court, which ruled that the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCAA, which bars a person from bringing a civil action against a manufacturer or seller of a qualified product for damages or other relief resulting from the criminal or unlawful misuse of the product by a person or a third party. And qualified products include, among other things, firearms and ammunition. Now, they ruled that the PLCAA did not bar suit against gun manufacturers when someone uses their product for illegal purposes. And this is just ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as holding Chevy liable for the actions of a drunk driver behind the wheel of a Silverado. It's ridiculous. Or just like the bank that loaned the company building the pipeline money, they're not responsible for any malpractice on the part of that company that results in an oil spill. It makes me wonder if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is sitting on the Supreme Court. I mean, it's just, wow. It just makes no sense. There doesn't seem to be any such thing as individual responsibility or individual achievement anymore. Obama famously said, "You didn't build that." Hoplophobic anti-constitutionalists say that gun crime is the gun's fault. They want to give people universal health care and universal income. But there's no personal responsibility. It's not the government's job to feed us, to clothe us, to pay us. And it's not the manufacturer's job to make sure that whoever buys their products doesn't use them illegally. It is, however, the government's job to make sure that prohibited possessors cannot walk into a gun store and buy one of those weapons. But that's a responsibility that they have failed to fulfill far too often. Now, on the flip side of that, Representative Andrew McDaniel out of Missouri, he introduced a bill that will require adults aged 18 to 34 to own an AR-15, at least one AR-15. Now, when I first heard this, I thought, come on, man, this is a bad idea. For all the obvious reasons. The Second Amendment, it's about our right to keep and bear arms. It's a right that we can choose whether or not we want to exercise. So to then require people to own a gun is just as bad as requiring them to turn them in. And that also means that the government is requiring us to spend money on a product that we may or may not want or be able to afford. So for a small government conservative like myself, both extremes are terrible ideas. But then I went and I read the bill and read his comments about it and realized that this is actually brilliant. He never meant for this bill to pass, but he wants to force the left to argue against mandates that they love to employ any other time. So I'm going to keep an eye on this and see how it plays out, because yes, it's a stunt, but I think it's a brilliant stunt designed to shine a light on the left's hypocrisy. And anytime we can do that, I am all for it. Finally, before we get you out of here, I want to talk about the college admission scandal. What does it actually say about the state of our higher education system? What is a degree from a prestigious school actually worth? And why did people like Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman risk doing this and getting caught? Does the degree mean anything anymore? And should we be surprised that these people actually did this, allegedly? Well, of course we shouldn't, because a degree from one of these schools is a status symbol. It's not indicative of any real academic achievement, not anymore. There was a time when, in order to graduate from a school like that, you would have to learn Latin or Greek. You would have to have read classic literature. And graduating with honors meant that you really put in some work to achieve something. You completed a degree, and there was some academic rigor involved. But now a graduate from Yale with a degree in English can graduate without ever having read Shakespeare. This is Yale. Now, if your parents bought your way into an academic institution and you demonstrated no academic prowess to get in without them having to buy that admission, and there are no academic standards, no rigorous academic standards while you're there, does the certificate that you get at the end of those 4 years mean anything other than the status symbol that I mentioned? No. How can it possibly? Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about technical degrees. I'm not talking about degrees in engineering or architecture or business degrees or anything like that. This is strictly in reference to the liberal arts. Now, full disclosure, I don't have a degree. I was in the military. I worked in security and law enforcement, and then I went on to technical school and went on to a career in technology, which I'm still working at today. But I talk about this without any type of jealousy or condescension of any kind. Some of the smartest and most accomplished people I know never went to a 4-year college. Obviously, some did, but between the lax academic standards and the fact that so many people have their slots at these schools bought and paid for, either through means like Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin employed, or by rich people just spending millions of dollars to build libraries or dorms on campuses. Those degrees, even from the most prestigious schools, don't mean what they used to mean. At least not in any real way. But it's still nice to have that certificate that says Harvard, that says Yale, that says Princeton, that says Columbia, that says USC. Not that it's in the same league as those other schools I mentioned, obviously, but I mention it because that's the school that one of those women bribed somebody to get their kid into. But decades ago, if you were interviewing somebody with a degree from one of those schools, you could pretty much guarantee that they had an above average, if not superior intellect. Now, who knows? And that's not to say that it's not worth it to go to one of these schools. For some people, it may very well be. But to put such an emphasis on it, that still seems to be put on it. If there was ever any doubt that these degrees are not quite as estimable as they once were, this scandal pretty much blows that doubt out of the water, at least for me. All right, y'all, that's our show for today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and iHeartRadio. Also, feel free to hit me up on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and it's at The Liberty Cast on all 3 platforms. I look forward to hearing from you and talking to you soon. But until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.